The night fell heavy over Texarkana during that suffocating summer of 1974. The border city, divided between Texas and Arkansas, kept secrets that not everyone wanted to know. And the biggest one hung beneath an old iron bridge on the outskirts of town, where the dirt road met the dry creek that only flowed when it rained hard. It all began when Sheriff Daniels received an anonymous call on a Tuesday in August. A trembling woman's voice said only, "There are ropes at the Miller Rope Bridge." Ropes with hangman's knots. When he arrived at the location with his 2 deputies, Larry and Tom, he found exactly that. 5 thick sisal ropes tied to the rusty iron beams, swaying slowly in the night wind. Each one ended in a perfect slip knot, too professional to be the work of some bored teenager. The sheriff illuminated the ropes with his powerful flashlight, searching for bloodstains or any evidence or use. Nothing. The ropes were clean, even new, but there were no bodies. There were never any bodies. Sheriff Daniels was a practical man, a Korea veteran who didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. He had all the ropes cut down, placed them as evidence in plastic bags, and returned to the station convinced it was the work of some disturbed person trying to scare the population. He made a simple report, filed the case as vandalism, and moved on. 3 days later, on a Saturday night, the ropes were there again. Same quantity, same exact position, same impeccable knots. This time, the sheriff brought a larger team and decided to set up a watch. For 2 consecutive nights, Larry stayed hid in a patrol car 200 meters from the bridge with binoculars and a thermos of strong coffee. Nothing happened. On the 3rd night, tired and sleepy, he dozed off for no more than 15 minutes. When he woke up, startled by his own snoring, he grabbed the binoculars and almost dropped his coffee. There they were again. 5 ropes swaying gently beneath the bridge, as if they had always been there. Larry swore he hadn't seen anyone approach. He also swore he would never do watch duty alone at that cursed bridge again. The news spread through town like wildfire in dry pasture. Texarkana was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and large enough for rumors to take on a life of their own. People began to talk. Old residents remembered stories their grandparents told, stories that had always seemed like exaggerated legends until that summer. They spoke of 5 men hanged at that bridge in 1891 during a dark period in local history that no one liked to mention. They said they were innocent, falsely accused of a crime they didn't commit, hanged by a furious mob that didn't want to wait for trial. Mrs. Abernathy, who was 92 years old and lived in the yellow house near the library, told the sheriff that her grandfather had witnessed the hangings when he was a boy. He never forgot the screams, she said with tears in her eyes. He said, the men screamed that they were innocent, that they would return to prove it. My grandfather had nightmares until the end of his life. He never crossed that bridge again, took a 5-mile detour to avoid it. The sheriff wrote everything down, but deep down he thought they were just old people's stories, mixing memory with imagination. Then the young people began to challenge the bridge. As always happens in small towns when an urban legend emerges, Texarkana's teenagers saw an opportunity to prove their courage. Danny Kirkwood was the first. 17 years old, captain of the high school football team, long blonde hair and an unshakable confidence that only youth allows. On a Friday night, after the game against the Atlanta team, he filled his blue Chevy Impala with 5 friends and drove to the bridge. It was almost midnight when they arrived. It's just an old bridge, guys. Danny laughed as he opened the car door. I'm going to walk across and come back. 2 minutes. His friends stayed in the car with the engine running and the radio playing Led Zeppelin softly. Danny lit a cigarette, tossed his team jacket on the back seat and began to walk. The bridge was about 50 meters long, rusty iron structure that creaked with the wind. In the middle of the crossing, Danny stopped. His friends saw him tilt his head up, looking at the beams. He stayed like that for about 10 seconds, completely motionless. Then he started to run. He ran like he had never run on the field, his sneakers kicking up dust from the dirt road, his eyes wide open. When he got in the car, he was pale as wax. Drive was all he could say. Drive now. Later, in the Dairy Queen parking lot, trembling and drinking a milkshake he couldn't even taste, Danny told what he had seen. When he looked up, there were silhouettes. 5 dark silhouettes, swinging, hanging from the beams, like bodies moving slowly in the wind. They weren't empty ropes. They were human shapes, dancing in the air in a macabre choreography. And then he heard it. The creaking of rope under tension, that high-pitched, rhythmic sound that fiber makes when it's holding weight. They weren't empty ropes swinging, Danny repeated several times. There was something hanging from them. I saw it. Danny's story should have been a warning, but it worked as an invitation. In the following weeks, groups of young people began making nightly pilgrimages to the bridge. Most saw nothing more than an old, dark bridge. Some swore they had seen strange shadows, but everyone who stayed long enough, everyone who crossed the bridge after midnight with attention and silence, heard the creaking. It was unmistakable. The characteristic sound of sisal ropes under great tension, stretching and relaxing in a rhythm that seemed almost respiratory. Sarah Mitchell was 19 years old and studying journalism at the community college. Unlike the other young people who visited the bridge for fun or challenge, Sarah wanted to understand. She wanted to investigate, document, maybe even write a story for the local newspaper. She was skeptical by nature, daughter of a physics professor, and a nurse raised to question and seek rational explanations. Mas hysteria, she told her parents at dinner. Group psychology, manufactured fear. I'm going to prove it. On the night of September 15th, Sarah went to the bridge alone, armed with a Polaroid camera, a cassette recorder, and a powerful flashlight. She arrived at 11:40, parked her red Volkswagen Beetle at a safe distance, and waited. She wanted it to be after midnight, wanted to replicate the conditions everyone reported. While waiting, she smoked 3 cigarettes and reviewed her notes. She had interviewed 17 people who claimed to have seen or heard something at the bridge. The reports were surprisingly consistent. Always after midnight, always the 5 silhouettes, always the creaking of the ropes. At 5 minutes past midnight, Sarah got out of the car. The night was clear. Crescent moon in the cloudless sky, pleasant temperature. For September, she turned on the recorder. September 15th, 1974, 0 hours and 6 minutes. Sarah Mitchell beginning investigation at Miller Road Bridge. Her voice sounded firm, professional. She began to walk. The bridge's iron structure creaked naturally with her steps, a metallic sound that echoed in the night silence. Normal, expected. She recorded this on the tape. In the middle of the bridge, Sarah stopped and looked up. At first, she saw nothing but the crisscrossed iron beams, dark against the starry sky. Then she noticed the ropes, 5 ropes hanging, swaying slightly. This is strange, she spoke into the recorder. The ropes were cut by police 3 days ago. How did they come back? She took a Polaroid photo, the flash briefly illuminating the entire structure. She waited for the photo to develop, shaking it in the air as she had learned. When the image appeared, her heart raced. In the photo, the ropes weren't empty. Sarah looked up again, now with more attention. And that's when she saw it. They weren't just shadows or tricks of light. They were defined silhouettes, 5 human forms suspended in the air, swaying in a slow, synchronized dance. They had no features, were just dark outlines, but the shape was unmistakably human. Heads tilted at an unnatural angle, arms along the body, legs slightly bent. Sarah tried to take another photo, but her hands trembled so much she almost dropped the camera. That's when the sound began. Low at first, almost imperceptible, then gradually growing, the creaking of ropes. It wasn't the sound of wind or the metal structure. It was specific, rhythmic, organic in a way. Sarah had grown up on a farm, knew the sound of tensioned ropes holding hay bales. This was identical, but multiplied by 5. Each rope creaking in its own rhythm, creating a macabre symphony of fibers under stress. And below the creaking, almost subliminal, there was another sound. It sounded like labored breathing, or distant whispers, or perhaps it was just the wind through the iron beams. Sarah wasn't sure and didn't want to be. She began to back away, slowly at first, keeping the silhouettes in view. The recorder was still on, capturing everything. Her hurried steps, her accelerated breathing, the constant creaking of the ropes. "I'm seeing it," she said into the recorder, her voice now trembling. "I'm seeing the 5 silhouettes. I'm hearing the sound. I don't know what this is, but it's real. It's real." When she was 5 meters from the end of the bridge, Sarah turned and ran. She ran without looking back, got in the car, started the engine with violently shaken hands, and left with the tires screeching on the dirt road. The next morning, Sarah took the cassette tape and Polaroid photos to Sheriff Daniels. He listened to the recording 3 times, studied the photos with a magnifying glass. In the images, the silhouettes were visible, though blurred and indistinct. They could be tricks of shadow and light, but they were disturbingly suggestive. On the tape, the creaking was undeniable. "Could be the wind," suggested the sheriff, but his voice had no conviction. "Could be the metal structure expanding with temperature." Sarah just looked at him. They both knew it wasn't that. The sheriff decided to call for outside help. He contacted a structural engineer from Dallas to examine the bridge, an acoustics expert from the university to analyze the sounds, and even a Catholic priest from the diocese, just to be Safi. The engineer spent an entire day at the bridge, measuring, testing, hitting beams with hammers. His conclusion was straightforward. The bridge is old and needs maintenance, but structurally sound. The creaking I heard is consistent with old metal under thermal stress. As for the ropes, someone is repeatedly placing them there. There's no structural explanation for it. The acoustics expert was more intrigued. He recorded sounds for 3 consecutive nights, using professional equipment sensitive enough to capture the flutter of a moth's wings. After midnight, his instruments consistently registered a sound pattern he couldn't explain. "It's not the wind," he told the sheriff. "It's not the metal structure. It's something more complex, almost as if there were an internal sound source to the bridge itself. The harmonics are strange, outside the pattern. Honestly, I've never seen anything like this." He returned to Austin confused and fascinated, promising to write an academic article about the phenomena. Father Sullivan, a robust 50-year-old man with experience in exorcisms, visited the bridge on a Thursday night. He brought holy water, a Bible, a crucifix, and a young seminarian as an assistant. They arrived at 11:30, prayed the complete rosary in the car, and then went out to bless the bridge. The priest sprinkled holy water on the iron beams, recited prayers in Latin, made the sign of the cross over each rope hanging from the beams. Everything was calm until midnight. When the clock on the car dashboard struck exactly 0 hour, the priest stopped in the middle of a prayer. The seminarian saw him go rigid, eyes fixed on the beams above. "Father," called the young man, "are you seeing this?" Father Sullivan nodded slowly. There were the 5 silhouettes, clearer than any previous witness had described. And this chimney? They weren't just swaying, they were moving, writhing, as if trying to free themselves from their invisible ropes. The priest began to recite an exorcism prayer, but his voice failed when the creaking began, so loud it hurt the ears. The 2 churchmen fled the bridge without shame. Later, in the bishop's office, Father Sullivan made his report with hands still trembling. "They're not demons," he said. "They're trapped souls. 5 men who died violently, unjustly, and cannot depart. The bridge has become a spiritual anchor. They relive their death every night after midnight, trapped in a temporal loop or something I cannot fully comprehend." The bishop asked if a complete exorcism could help. The priest shook his head. "We need something more. We need justice, recognition. They want someone to know the truth." Sarah Mitchell decided to discover that truth. She spent weeks at the Municipal Library and County Historical Archive, diving into yellowed newspapers from 1891. She finally found a small reference, almost hidden, on page 6 of the Texarkana Gazette from August 23rd of that year. The headline read, "5 men hanged for heinous crime. Swift justice applied by outraged population." The article was short and full of euphemisms, but Sarah managed to piece things together. The 5 men were railroad workers, 3 black and 2 Irish immigrants, employed in the expansion of the line that cut through Texarkana. They were accused of robbing and killing a wealthy town merchant, a man named Cornelius Whit. The evidence was circumstantial. They were near the crime scene, had blood on their clothes, which they claimed was from a rabbit they had hunted for dinner, and one of them had a knife similar to the murder weapon. There was no formal trial. A crowd of more than 100 people took them from the makeshift jail, led them to the newly built bridge over the creek, and hanged them from beams still smelling of fresh paint. Sarah dug deeper. She found records that 3 months after the hangings, another man confessed to Whitmore's murder on his deathbed. His name was Thomas Beckham, Whitmore's own nephew, who had killed his uncle for inheritance. The confession was documented, signed by a nurse and a priest, but there was no public retraction, no rehabilitation of the 5 hanged men, no apology. The town simply moved on, burying the mistake along with the victims in unmarked graves. Sarah published her discovery in the Texarkana Gazette in a full-page article, "Innocents Hanged in 1891. Town Owes the Dead an Apology." The reaction was mixed. Some older residents were outraged, saying she was digging up the past unnecessarily. Others, especially in the black community, felt vindicated. City Hall formed a committee to discuss the case. There were proposals for a memorial, a commemorative plaque to rename the bridge, but the apparitions continued. Every night, after midnight, the 5 silhouettes danced beneath the bridge. The creaking of ropes echoed through the dry creek. Young people still dared to go there, now with a complete story in mind, and returned pale and babbling. Some said they heard voices beyond the creaking, words they couldn't fully distinguish, but that sounded like pleas or accusations. A 16-year-old girl swore she heard a clear whisper, "Remember us." In October 1974, City Hall finally acted. They organized a reconciliation ceremony at the bridge. The mayor was there, Sheriff Daniels, representatives from the black and Irish communities, Father Sullivan, Sarah Mitchell with a notebook, and more than 200 people. It was on a Sunday afternoon, purposely during the day, as if sunlight could make everything safer and more controlled. Speeches were made. The mayor officially apologized on behalf of the city for the terrible mistakes of the past. A bronze plaque was unveiled, listing the names of the 5 men: Thomas Wade, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Johnson, Patrick O'Brien, and Moses Washington. The plaque read, "In memory of 5 innocent men lynched at this location on August 20th. Their souls finally find peace. May we never forget this injustice." Texarkana remembers and asks forgiveness. There were prayers, hymns, embraces between descendants of the families involved. It was emotional and cathartic. Everyone hoped that would be enough, that the ghosts could finally rest. That night, Sarah returned to the bridge. She had to know. She arrived at 11:45, parked in the same spot as always, and waited. The moon was full, illuminating the bridge with a ghostly silver light. The bronze plaque gleamed on the beams, new and shiny. At midnight, Sarah walked to the center of the bridge. She looked up, heart pounding hard. There were no ropes. The beams were empty, clean, just old iron against the night sky. There were no silhouettes, no creaking, no whispers, just silence and the gentle autumn breeze. Sarah began to cry, not knowing exactly why. Relief, perhaps, or sadness for everything those men had suffered, or simply the release of weeks of tension and fear. She stood there for 20 minutes, alone on the silent bridge, paying her own respects. When she finally returned to the car, she felt that something had fundamentally changed. The bridge was still old and gloomy, but it was no longer haunted. Or perhaps, Sarah thought, as she drove back home, the haunting had never been about ghosts. It had been about collective guilt, about unacknowledged injustices, about how a town cannot move forward when it leaves its dead without rest. In the following weeks, others confirmed it. The apparitions had ceased. Young people who visited the bridge after midnight saw nothing more than an old bridge. The creaking had stopped. The ropes, which mysteriously reappeared for months, never came back. Sheriff Daniels officially closed the case as unexplained phenomena resolved through community reconciliation, a phrase he knew would sound absurd in any other context, but that in Texarkana made perfect sense. The bridge is still there today, now called the 5 Memorial Bridge. The bronze plaque remains affixed to the beams, occasionally visited by historians and curious onlookers. The town incorporated the story into its historical tours, not with pride, but with the sober honesty of those who learned that acknowledging past mistakes is the only way not to repeat them. Sarah Mitchell became a respected investigative journalist, but that story in Texarkana remained the most important of her career. And on summer nights, when the town's elders gather on porches to tell stories, someone always mentions the Hangman's Bridge and how 5 men finally found the peace denied to them in life 83 years after their unjust death. When a town finally had the courage to say, "We were wrong and we ask forgiveness."